Okay, welcome back, everybody. So where'd those poll results go? I saw that the poll ended. Where's the poll? Polling. Okay. 74% no answer. 6% Windows and 6% JavaScript web. Not a lot of people entered the poll. Okay, so first, I'd like to interview Sam if he's around. So Sam, I'm going to unmute you. You there?
I am here. Hi, everybody.
Hey. So Sam, how are you doing? How did your presentation go? It already went, right?
Yes, I did it this morning. I thought it went over pretty well. I got some great questions at the end, and it seems like people were pretty excited about it, and I'm excited to talk more if people have more questions.
Cool. So yeah, if people want to add in some questions to the Q&A, they can do that here. But let's start off by I've got a question for you. So Sam, we get this question a lot related to AI, like what about privacy, but also really like the long term, like are robots going to take over the world? Like the same question we get for AI, I'm sure you get for robots all the time. And so, how do you usually answer that question and handle it?
Yeah, sure. So occasionally I do get asked, what about robots taking over the world? Most of the time most of the time I tell people, look, if we could just get the robots working for, a week at a time, a month at a time, without needing any maintenance, that would be a huge leap forward. So I'm not worried about them taking over. But occasionally I do get a slightly more nuanced take on it, which is, AI. It's usually people that have, read stuff about like the singularity or like super intelligence and talking about how, hey, how can we make sure that the advanced AI systems of the future have human goals or have sort of humanity's best interests. They don't kind of get out of control or get sort of misaligned with with the things we want them to do. And so that I think it kind of has an interesting tie back into the emotion technology stuff. A lot of AI is sort of stereotypically rational, right? Sort of like purely rational, just computing the next thing or logically deducing things. And it's a little cut off from the outside physical world. Certainly when it comes to interacting with humans, we're not even close to the level of sophistication that humans are at, or that even really like young children are at. Robots don't take into account, how their actions might make people feel. They don't take into account, how their actions might impact the way that others then act. So there's a number of steps that would need to be taken that I think we're really just starting to kind of scratch that itch now. And I think if we were to sort of further explore that, giving robots and AI this sort of emotional intelligence, I think the whole idea of robots taking over is a little overblown, but if we were to give them emotional intelligence, I think that would sort of bring them a little closer to making sure that what they do is sort of aligned with humanity and human values.
Totally. So how did you get to where you are? So what is your background? And you might have covered this in your talk, but I was on this track hosting. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I didn't really talk about my background at all. I mostly just tried to focus on the project. But let's see. So I kind of got what I sort of think of as like a bit of a late start in computer science. I took my first computer science class in college. I took like the basic, intro to programming class in college and kind of just ran with it from there. One of the things that I think was a real formative moment for me, kind kind of getting into this was I've always liked trivia, and I've always sort of been, a big fact head, and I read like encyclopedias and stuff. And actually, I was a contestant on Jeopardy. I think this is in my bio on the page. I was a contestant on Jeopardy when I was in college. I went on, played a couple of games. It was super fun. And then maybe like 6 months after that, I watched the IBM Watson event, where they had their AI go on Jeopardy and just clean the floor with Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter, two of the best Jeopardy players of all time. And I saw that and I thought, wow, this is incredible. This is just like AI technology has come so far. So I started to really get into AI. And one thing that I sort of started thinking about was, okay, so they have made this AI that can be a great Jeopardy contestant. But AI and robots are really far away from being able to be a Jeopardy host. I look at stuff that like Alex Trebek does up there, right? He's so polished at it. He just keeps the game moving along. He interfaces with the contestants really well. He has sort of appropriate responses to all these things. And I thought, there's no robot that can do that. So that kind of got me interested in this subfield of social robots, robots that can interact with people, robots that can sort of pick up on these cues and interact very fluently with other humans. And that was exciting. That led me to MIT, to the Media Lab, working with Cynthia Brazil there, who's sort of the foremost expert in social robots. And then, from there, I got a master's, I started a PhD, and then Cynthia founded a company, Jibo. And I sort of saw a real opportunity to take, what I sort of learned and what I've been working on in school and try to apply that, at a bigger scale, try to make sure that Jibo, the robot, sort of brought that social intelligence to the world. And hopefully, I'm optimistic about this, hopefully, really sort of redefine the level of sociability and, sort of emotional rapport that people come to expect from their technology.
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about Jibo. So when was it founded? Who is Cynthia the CEO?
Cynthia is the Chief Science Officer. Our CTO is Steve Chambers. He was formerly an executive at Nuance Communications, so he's got a lot of experience in sort of bringing voice-activated technology to a sort of global audience. It was founded in 2014. We are, hard at work at getting that robot out the door. I've learned a lot there, both in terms of the sort of core underlying technology, but also in what it takes to really build a company, what it really means to sort of, and, Affectiva has a similar story too. What does it mean to take this technology out of a lab environment, find a market for it, develop it as a product, refine the product, and be successful as a company. So it's really exciting. I've had great experiences here, and there's still lots left to do. Tons of potential, and tons of opportunity for growth and applications in this space.
Cool. And so, could you tell a little bit about specifically the robot that you're working on? So Jibo, and where could people potentially get it, or like when is it available and such?
Right. So Jibo is the world's social. We're pitching Jibo as the world's first social robot for the home. So he's going to be sort of like a home assistant. You can think of him as kind of a mix between Amazon Echo and Wall-E. So we want him to be functional. We want him to help you, achieve your goals in life. But we also want him to be more than just a talking voice in a can. We want him to have sort of a rich inner life. We want him to be able to relate to you personally. So he's got cameras, he's got a microphone, he's got a screen, so you can talk to him. He'll talk to recognize you through his cameras. He can display things on screen. He knows who you are as opposed to someone else in your family. And he can, sort of understand contextually when you say something versus when someone else in your family says something, what it is that you mean. Yeah, you should go check out our website, www.jibo.com. It was actually, I think we just redid the website last week, so it's sort of all brand new and shiny. You can sign up for the waitlist there, and we send regular emails out to that waitlist, updating everyone on our progress.
And so something that you have similar for Jibo is that you have some type of software development kit API. Could you talk a little bit about that and about how that works and what you like? Do you do events like this? How tell me about how your outreach to developers.
So we do have an SDK available, and you can actually download that right now at, I think, developers.jibo.com. You can download. It's a beta version of the SDK, but it comes with a full-featured Jibo simulator, so you can run a little simulation of Jibo and write skills, using the SDK. So we want to give people the ability. We see Jibo not as just a product, but also as a platform. We want developers to be able to unlock Jibo's potential to do, all kinds of things. We've already seen some great stuff come out of the developer community. There's been a recipe skill that people have posted, if this then that integration, sort of a 7-minute workout skill. In the poll, what's your favorite platform to develop for? I put down JavaScript and the web, and that's because the Jibo SDK is it's all JavaScript, Node.js. It's sort of one of the hottest growing development environments now. It's made incredible progress over the past 2 years, which I'm really excited about. So one of the things there that we hope to do, and we've been working a little bit on an integration with Affectiva, which is super awesome, and I really think is going to bring really just another level of depth to the Jibo experience.
Cool. Yeah, JavaScript has definitely come a long way. One of the early video games I wrote, which was like 10 years ago, was written in JavaScript and has come very far from that.
Yeah, I love TypeScript. We've switched over almost all of our new development out of TypeScript, and it's such a joy to use compared to I wrote some old ES5 code. It's like night and day between the two.
So now, what would you like to see next in Emotion AI? Like, what feature, what capability would you really like to see either us or someone else develop that you could use?
Yeah. So one of the things that that I've been working on and that I think is really sort of ripe, and I kind of alluded to this at the end of my session, is that the core sensing technology is pretty good right now. We're able to sort of take frames of faces and get a pretty accurate read of emotion from that. But I think the big open questions are still sort of how do we extract meaningful conclusions out of that, and how do we integrate that into sort of core cognition? How do we kind of make sense of it from a moment in time? How do we go from the raw data to sort of making decisions based on it? Another thing that I'd love to see is sort of a more multimodal integration. I know that most of Affectiva stuff is based on facial action units, but I think it'd be super interesting to kind of do a multimodal cross correlation like galvanic skin response, or something like measuring postural shifts or other modalities that allow you to kind of get at emotion. Right, voice is another big one. Vocal prosody, really kind of building it out so that you get this holistic representation across a bunch of different channels. Face is a great one. That's probably the one that I'm sort of most comfortable with and that I trust the most. But there are some times in which facial tracking is not the right thing, right? And in which it would be useful to get, an emotional signal from other kinds of modalities. Certainly at Jibo, we've seen, right, from far away or in low light, sometimes the face isn't always super visible. So in those cases, especially with a voice-activated product like Jibo, getting an emotional read from the vocal prosody would be really awesome.
Cool. And so, one more question for you. So, what is like the ultimate use case, or what are some use cases that you feel are being missed for robotics? Like what are, like, obviously there are robots that are coming out and there are robots that are already there, but like what is being missed, and what do you think like really the direction might go in that maybe you personally would like to follow, or that you'd like to see the industry go into?
Yeah, I think what's going to be big, and I think people are kind of just starting to get this idea and get on board with it, but I think the idea of socially assistive robots is going to be big. I think the time is right for it now. So these are robots that are able to, improve people's lives through social interaction. So it's going to be things like, we've seen weight loss coaches have a lot of success. We've seen sort of, physical therapy coaches, or sort of like robots that are able to, sort of fulfill rote social roles in a way. We see there's like a huge shortage of sort of healthcare professionals, or either healthcare professionals are sort of overworked in various aspects. Nurses, for instance, they spend a lot of time just kind of like refilling medicine or, restocking things. I think robots could really help out there. And then I also think, for sort of outpatient kinds of things, right? I mean, not everyone can afford to have a, full-time live-in nurse to provide sort of social support, check in on you. So things like medication reminders, sort of, exercise encouragement or weight loss encouragement. Those kinds of things, I think robots are really going to be able to have an impact. And we've seen across a number of different cases that people actually do respond to robots in a very different way. People are, more likely to comply with, instructions given by a physical robot. They're more likely to stick with long-term behavioral changes. And I think that has to do with the fact that it's not, it's not an app on your phone that you can just kind of turn off or stash away. It's like this real physical thing that responds emotionally, and if you don't do what it wants you to do, it's gonna. I think having appropriate emotional responses is going to be key to that. If you skip your medicine, you skip your exercise, right? Your robot's going to know, and he's going to be a little disappointed in you. We've seen people over and over. We've seen people say, "Oh, I didn't want to disappoint the robot. I didn't." Right? I mean, all these things. I think that's a real big opportunity that is just starting to emerge kind of out of the lab and into sort of real-life applications. And I'm excited about that.
Cool. Well, thank you so very much. Is there any last statement you want to make, or?
I'd say no last statements other than, thanks to Affectiva for having me, for developing great technology that sort of enabled this. I mean, all the stuff that I've talked about would not have been possible without Affectiva technology. So it's really been just like an absolute pleasure working with you, as people personally, with your technology. And I'm really excited about sort of, what the future holds for that.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and TIGA is a really cool project that you worked on, and we're definitely rooting for Jibo, and we're looking forward to seeing it become like a ubiquitous social robot and in everybody's home. That'll be really cool.
I think so too. All right.
Okay.
Thanks for having me. Turn it back over to you.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to interview Rhonda next, and she's actually in the room with me, so I think we're going to play with the microphone a little bit. So just give me a second. I think what we'll do is we'll switch microphones so she has a good one, and we'll just go back and forth between being muted. So just hold on a second. Okay, so I have Rhonda here now in the room with me, and so I'm going to lead off with a question that maybe was getting alluded to a little bit in Q&As, but like, are we interested, is Affectiva interested in data partnerships, and what would that look like, and what would we do with the data? How would we protect it? And why don't you start with that, and maybe I can dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, we're very interested in data. So the way our machine learning kind of stack works is basically we need a ton of data to train and validate our different emotion classifiers. We also understand that emotions are very context specific. So, you know, a look of frustration may very well be different in a gaming context than in an education context. So the more contextually specific data we have, the better the accuracy of these algorithms. So we are always looking for data partners, people who have, you know, are open to collecting a lot of data to understand how people express emotion in various use cases. The way this would work is that you would use our cloud essentially to share this data, and we would agree on a protocol. Obviously, you know, the data is protected. We would not share it outside of Affectiva, but we would also collaborate on what expressions or what emotions are we looking for, and we get this data typically labeled, and we use it to build a very specific classifier for that use case. So if you do have that, you know, context-specific data, it could be in education, it could be in gaming, it could be in health, even in conversational data. If you were attending track 2, Dave Vokel, who is with Lighthouse, talked about how what the use case is telehealth. So, you know, they have a lot of interactions between nurses and patients. And that would be phenomenal data to get a sense of anxiety or frustration or depression. So what about privacy? So, you know, there's certainly huge concerns, and it's my understanding that most of our data doesn't even have, most of our metrics are based on data of adults because of privacy issues, perhaps. And so if there was a data partnership, how would that data be protected? What would happen? And yeah, just that. Take a step back and just talk about our SDKs and kind of, you know, privacy considerations with our SDKs. Our SDKs do all the processing on device, which means that none of the facial images or the facial video leaves the device ever. It does not get stored. It does the processing on the fly. And that was a design consideration that we felt very strongly about when we were designing the SDK, because we sensed that would, you know, it would just help with privacy concerns. So everything stays on the device. Nothing leaves the device ever. In a data partnership conversation, we typically are interested in the facial video data, and we would agree on, okay, we are, in a data partnership scenario, we are definitely interested in getting access to the facial videos. And what we typically do is we enter a partnership where there is an understanding that we would never share, you know, we would never share these videos outside of the Affectiva team. We also typically do not have PII information, so we're not outside of the video. So we do not track who that person is. We don't have any way of figuring out identity. We're more interested in the emotional expression. Yeah.
Great. So you were recently involved in the Web Summit with the gender quota debate, and so I'm curious, like, how did you feel about how it went? Lessons learned. What is your stance? And yeah, tell us your thoughts.
Absolutely, and Forrest, you're one of the biggest champions I know of getting more gender balance into tech companies, including Affectiva. So I feel very passionately about this topic. Obviously, my background is in computer science. When I was at Cambridge University doing my PhD, I was one of the very few women who were there doing their PhDs as well. And we, in fact, got together and created this Women at CL Cambridge Lab, where we supported each other. So I feel very strongly about that issue. And I think that while there's a lot of dialogue and conversation about the importance of gender balance and diversity in general, I actually want to take an opportunity to talk about the importance of getting diversity in general, across cultures, across experiences, across backgrounds, and across genders. There's been a ton of research to show that it is not just a nice to have. You're not just doing this for social justice. There are actual benefits to doing that. Companies who have more diversity, including gender diversity, have larger market shares. They have more sales. They have happier customers. So there are real benefits to having more gender balance. I would say that with gender quotas, I like to think of it as a bootstrapping mechanism for getting more, more equality, because I feel like there's a lot of dialogue, but there's not enough action. I think if it is applied, it needs to be applied very sensitively, so that it's not a turnoff. I think, if I went to a company's website and they say, oh, we strive to have 30% of our workforce be women, so apply, I think that could be a turnoff for many women. Whereas, on the other hand, if it's used as an internal driver, as a way to make sure that gender balance is top of mind and is translated into actions and specific plans, I think gender quotas could be very, very beneficial and helpful.
Cool. So I'm curious about what your personal struggles you face in computer science. I know that you had some personal struggles that you talked about in some context and some interview that related to actually your father. And so maybe you could start with like a cultural background of what you've faced there, and then more specifically in computer science. Because I think especially for people like me who are male and thus entitled, like, we don't necessarily see it. Like, we'll hear the stories, but when it doesn't happen to us, sometimes it's hard to believe. And like, we'd love to think that we're gender blind, but we're not. And so, like, to actually hear those stories, I think is really valuable. So.
Sure. So I grew up in the Middle East. I'm Egyptian by background, but my parents lived all over the Middle East in Kuwait and Dubai. We come from a family, and I'm fortunate, and I'm ever so grateful to my parents. We come from a family that values education, and so my parents very purposefully decided that they're going to spend and invest in my and my sister's education. However, I remember I had this uncle who always challenged my dad on that, and he was like, "Why are you investing so much money, sending your kids to these schools whereas they're just going to graduate, get married, and and not do anything with this education?" And so even though we come from a family that supports education, my dad got a lot of pushback investing in his daughter's education. And again, I feel like because he invested in us, I get to do what I do today. I think there's a very direct link between this investment in education and the opportunities it has allowed me to leverage. I think over time, as I went on and did my graduate studies, and from then on I started a company. I am definitely a misfit back home. People don't necessarily subscribe or even quite understand why and how am I doing, why am I doing all this? So I tend to be a very vocal advocate for women getting into STEM careers if they want to.
And do you have any specific examples where you struggled in computer science, not so much culturally, but maybe whether it was you were in Cambridge or you were at MIT or you were at, was it the Cairo, American University of Cairo, in any of those places or all three of those places? Like were there times that you felt there was sexism going on and that you were hurt by it and that you had to overcome it, and maybe in some cases you actually weren't able to overcome it? So Just curious about your thoughts there.
I have to say, I feel like overall I've been pretty fortunate. I don't know if it's because I was quite oblivious to the fact that I was a minority and kind of didn't, pay too much attention to it. But I do feel like, being a minority is a double-edged sword. It is challenging. You don't have a support group. You don't have a lot of role models to look up to. So that's definitely on the challenges side. Plus, there's a lot of pigeonholing that goes on. I will say, however, the advantage is that if you are an expert in what you do, you can very easily shine and stand out. And I feel that that was especially true with my work at Cambridge. It was especially true at my work with MIT. Being a woman has allowed, being a woman and an expert at what I do has allowed me to, be able to better tell my story, I guess. So I would encourage other women or females in this space to reach out. I think mentorship is very important, and finding a champion for you, whether it's a woman or a man, I think is very critical. And again, I've been fortunate to have these kinds of supporters around me.
So, as you know, I recently traveled to Japan, and before I went there, so I traveled there for vacation reasons, and when I go to a place that's culturally different, I really want to learn as much about it, both as much of the language as possible, but also about the culture. And so one of the things that we learned, my wife, my family, and I learned is that a lot of there are gender biases that are even stronger there than they are here in the U.S., and that a lot of women are avoiding families, and men are avoiding families too, but the main reason that women often avoid families is because they actually consider it, like, quote, the death of their career, unquote. And often what happens is that if they talk about getting engaged, they talk about getting married, or they talk about being pregnant, they'll get laid off and let go. And so there's a cultural bias here, and Facebook has this managing bias seminar that they talk about this, and where there's this bias about men mean work and career, women mean family. And so I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on balancing work and family? Could you tell us a little bit about the family that you have and how you're balancing it, and if you found any prejudice about it? But more specifically, I'm curious about, like, how you've balanced it.
Yeah, I'll draw from my own personal experience. So I have two kids. My daughter is 13 and my son is 7.5. I had my daughter, so, I did my PhD at Cambridge University. My husband back then was in Cairo, so I was on my own in Cambridge. And our plan was to hold off on having any kids until I'm done with my PhD. But of course, a year into it, I find out that I'm pregnant. I had to make a decision. Am I going to stick with this PhD or go back home, and kind of focus on having my daughter? And with the support of my husband back then, I decided to stick with the PhD. And what I found, and so basically I had my daughter, I was in second year in my doctorate degree, and I remember very clearly a week into, like, she's born, and there was a paper deadline a week into after I had her. And my advisor said, totally don't do it. But I was passionate. I think when people are intrinsically motivated and passionate about a cause or a topic, they'll put the work in. And I think that's true for women. It's true for men. It's true for moms. It's true for dads. And it's certainly been true in my case. So even though I was a mom and I was, working mom in a country abroad, I was still able to balance both taking care of her, but also finishing my PhD. And then a few years later, I was pregnant with my son, and that was about the same time we were raising money for Affectiva, and we were spinning Affectiva out of the MIT Media Lab. And once again, I remember I used to take, when I had Adam, I used to put him in a car seat and schlep him with me to an investor meeting, leave him with the assistant, outside the VC's office, and just pray to God that he doesn't, scream his head off during the pitch. So it was challenging for sure, but we raised money and yeah, so I'm just a big advocate of giving women the flexibility. If you want to stay at home, you should totally do that. If you want to have both and balance it, you should be able to do that.
And men too, I assume you want them to have the family balances.
Absolutely. I think men should have the family balance as well. And we're big advocates of that at Affectiva.
Yeah. So how did you get to where you are? So you talked a little bit about the colleges that you went to. Like, how did you go from Cambridge to MIT, and then MIT to Affectiva? Like, what led you here? And was this really where you thought you would go, say, like when you were 6 years old? Yeah, can you tell a little bit about your story and how you?
I don't know if that was my plan at 6, but I do remember, so I did my undergraduate in computer science at the American University in Cairo, and I was definitely more interested in the human-computer interaction courses than I was in like building the next operating system. And that's because I realized early on that computers and technology can really change the way we as humans interact with one another. And so I was curious about that. My career plan was to get a doctorate degree, join a reputable university, and teach and do research. And so when I got a scholarship at Cambridge, and it was the first kind of emotional reading computer that I built as part of my thesis. Professor Rosalind Picard was on my thesis committee. I had read her book many years earlier and just got totally inspired by her mission of affective computing. So I got to meet her in person towards the end of my PhD, and we totally hit it off, and she invited me to join her lab at MIT Media Lab. We were then focused on autism applications of emotion AI. I came to the US through a National Science Foundation fund. And so we were focused doing that, but being at MIT Media Lab twice a year, we would have this thing called Demo or Die Week, where we would invite all our industry sponsors, Fortune 100 companies, and show them what we're building. So for several years in a row, I would demonstrate our autism demo. And they would say, well, have you thought of using this technology in product testing? Or how about like advertising research or automotive or robotics? So I kept a log of all the different use cases, and 3 years in, we had about 20 of those. Roz, Picard, and myself were advocating to get 10 more research students to help kind of address these questions or requests. And our lab director, Frank Moss, at the time said, you know what, this is not a research question anymore. This is a commercialization opportunity. You need to spin off. And my initial reaction was, no, I'm a scientist. I'm going to become faculty. But then the tipping point for me was realizing that I've built something that only gets used by a very small number of people in a research context. And with a company, I have the opportunity to take this technology and really apply it worldwide in a way that is sustainable and changes how we connect and communicate with one another, and hence Affectiva.
I think there's a question.
Yeah, I think it was a comment. The one from C.S. Spencer?
No, from Nermeen Shahtoot. What advice would you give a female computer scientist who would like to join?
Oh, that must have been a direct question. Okay, great. So I will switch back to you. What?
Yep. We have a question here from Nermeen Shahtoot. What advice would you give a female computer scientist who would like to join a job as a scientist or pursue a PhD? What advice would you give them to penetrate such a market? I'm going to rephrase this question. I think you're asking whether a female computer scientist, how do you evaluate whether to join industry versus become an academic and pursue a PhD? I would say, again, my career plan was to become a faculty, and I still enjoy teaching and research, but I feel like you get to do that in industry as well. As a person who presents a lot, and actually at Affectiva, we're always pushing the boundaries of what can be done with our technology. And so I'd say we often push it beyond what you would do as a researcher in a university because we have access to all this real-world data. Honestly, I think it boils down to what are you passionate about. And I think you have to have this very honest dialogue with yourself. But trust that there's a lot of options out there.
So what would you say your long-term vision is for Affectiva? So, you know, clearly we're a company of about 50 people, and we know where we are now, but like for the people that are listening to this talk, and maybe for myself as an employee, where do you see Affectiva in, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
Yeah, I think we're in a very big and ambitious mission to humanize technology with artificial emotional intelligence. And I say it's a big mission or a big vision because there's a lot of use cases. I fundamentally believe that our technology can help improve people's lives. It can help motivate people to exercise more, be more healthier, make better decisions, be more productive, communicate better. I think it really, be safer in self-driving cars. I think it really cuts across a wide gamut of applications, and I feel fortunate that we get to play a piece in driving these use cases and seeing them happen and applying them at scale. So I would say in 5 to 10 years, I envision a world where the way we interact with technology is very perceptual. It is very emotion aware. And I like to say, imagine if we had an emotion chip embedded into our devices. Could be your laptop, your phone, your car, your robot, your smart TV, even your walls and fridge. What if these devices could sense and adapt to human emotion in a way that is very ambient and pervasive?
And in the previous talk, Sam asked, Sam was saying he'd be curious about long-term seeing emotion AI being more multimodal. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are and like what value could we get out of multimodal? Is there anything we can expect from Affectiva in the future for multimodal context? You know what, maybe even just defining multimodal for those of us that don't know the word. I know what it means, but some people on the line might actually not know what it means.
Yeah, so humans express emotion in a multitude of ways. We express emotion through our faces, and that's what Affectiva has focused on over the past few years, but we express emotion through our gestures and our tone of voice and our posture, as well as our physiology. And so to get the best or most accurate picture of a person's emotional expression, we envision a world where it's multimodal. Multimodal in the sense that you're incorporating all these different channels of information to come up with a decision or an inference about the person's emotional state. For the past few years, you find people hunkered down in one particular channel. So there are people who are primarily focused on speech, others who are primarily focused on physiology. And it's only now that these sensors, these individual modalities have become accurate enough that we're all looking up and saying, oh, let's collaborate, let's integrate. So multimodal is very high on Affectiva's roadmap. We are working to integrate other modalities, specifically speech, so stay tuned for updates on that. We hired one of the top researchers and speech scientists. I like to say, she and I have had parallel careers. She spent the last 15 years doing what I've been doing on face, but she's been doing it on speech, Tanya. So yeah, look out for updates on that thread. And also, if this is an area that interests you and you have data or you'd like to collaborate, please reach out and talk to us.
Cool, and I know that Tanya just heard you because she's listed in the attendees. So, hi, Tanya.
Hi, Tanya.
So I joined the company after Rosalind left, and so I get asked a lot, like, oh, is that Rosalind's company? And so how's Rosalind doing? Do you know what she's working on? Can you talk to anything about why she left? Yeah, so let me.
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who do not know who Roz Picard is, she wrote the book Affective Computing in the late 90s, and she runs a group at MIT Media Lab under the same title, the Affective Computing Group. Her book was the thesis her book put forward is that technology needs to read and understand emotions. And again, that was back in the late 90s, so it was very, very visionary. I read her book, I ordered her book in 1998, all the way in Cairo. It took about 4 months to get to Cairo. It was held up in customs. I have no idea why. It's a pretty, it's not a very controversial book. But when I read the book, I was just totally inspired, and I decided that that's the area of research that I want to focus on. Roz is my mentor. She's my role model. She's a great example of a woman who balances wears many hats. She's an amazing scientist. She's an amazing, advisor. She's a mom. She's 3 boys. And so I'm fortunate that I get to work with her. When she and I started Affectiva, we had 2 different modalities, if you like. Her research was primarily focused on physiology. She had built a wearable sensor at MIT to understand people's arousal responses. I was focused on face. And when we started Affectiva, we were quite a small team, and we were getting pulled in different directions. So the main use case for the Q sensor was around medical applications, specifically things like autism and seizure detection, whereas with the face, we were getting pulled into advertising research and marketing research. And for a small company, it is very hard to do both. It is especially hard to have a hardware product. So unless that's a core competency of the company, you're not really making any money. In fact, you're bleeding a lot of money. So we made the hard decision in 2012 to sunset the hardware sensor. We still own a lot of the IP, but Roz has taken this, and she started a separate company called Empatica, and they are commercializing this sensor, and they are specifically focused on epilepsy and seizure detection, which is awesome to see. She is still a big champion for the company. She's a major stakeholder. Oh yeah, Empatica. So Empatica is E-M-P-A-T-I-C-A. And they had an Indiegogo campaign a while ago, blew their target, and I think they're about to ship their sensor very soon.
Yeah, I just wanted you to say how to spell Empatica, because I didn't know, but also people often don't know how to say or spell Affectiva, so I'm sure. Yeah, we don't make yogurt. So you briefly mentioned autism, and my understanding of kind of the founding of the company is that a lot of it was related to autism, and maybe it wasn't really paying the bills, but it was still something that we were very interested in. So could you talk about autism maybe over time, and like where are we now with autism? Like what are we providing for people that are working on autism, and maybe what did we used to do?
Yep. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the project that brought me over to the U.S. A few years ago was an NSF-funded project to build wearable glasses for autistic kids. So the idea is it's a pair of glasses with a little camera. It points outwards. It's connected to this was before iPads existed, but it's connected to a little computer that processes the facial videos in real time, and then it gives the kid or the adult, the autistic individual, real-time feedback on this interaction. So it would say, Rana, you've been talking for the past 15 minutes. Forrest is like bored to death. You may want to stop and ask him a question or change topics. So we piloted this technology with a school in Providence, Rhode Island, the Groton Center, with about 40 kids. It was quite successful. It helped a lot of the kids do more eye contact and just learn about different facial expressions that they hadn't really thought about before. So fast forward a few years, today, as a small startup, we're not going to specifically focus on autism, but the cool thing, and this is why we have the Developer Day organized, is we believe that through partners, we can penetrate and we can really exist in a lot of these markets. So we are now partnered with a company called BrainPower. They're a Harvard spin-out, and they use Google Glass to build these interactive games for kids on the autism spectrum. We have a very cool video of this mom that is interacting with her kid who's on the spectrum. He's wearing Google Glass, and through this game, it's the first time ever he actually makes direct eye contact with the mom, and she just totally breaks down into tears. So you can very quickly see the power of these types of technologies, and it's we're fortunate to be able to partner with companies like BrainPower to bring our technology to this population.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. Just so people know that are on this track, Nick, whose last name I'm going to pronounce wrong, on Body, I got it right, okay, is going to be up next, and Aaron Reynolds will be on track 2. So Aaron Reynolds will be talking about Flying Mollusk and the game that they made there, Nevermind. We still have a few minutes here, but and then Nick is going to be here, and it's going to be a technical talk. So again, track 1 is generally where the more technical tracks are, when there are 2-track things going on at once. So the gaming one is going to be non-technical. And so Nick is going to be talking about emotion as a service, which actually probably isn't very technical.
Part of it is, part of it isn't.
It's, okay, so he just kind of shrugged and said, yeah, part of it is, part of it is. So, but anyway, so for Rana, I've got one more question, and then give her a chance to have a closing statement, but kind of a lighthearted one. What countries have you lived in, and what do you miss from those countries?
Oh.
I have lived in a lot of countries. So I grew up I was born in Cairo and lived there for a few years. I also lived in Kuwait right until the first Gulf War, and then the United Arab Emirates, as well as London, now the US, and I've visited. I love traveling. I love, like you, exploring a lot of cultures and getting to know a lot of people. And I fundamentally believe that getting to work with and interact with people from a diverse culture just makes you a better person. What I miss about these other, I'll talk about Cairo and Egypt specifically. I miss the family. I miss how intimate people are, and how, there's a lot of emphasis on social relationships, and there's less emphasis on the individual, I'd say. So I miss that. I make sure that my kids get to experience that and remember that that's a big part of our identity. So come see Egypt.
Any last statements?
I guess the last statement would be about the importance of, Affectiva can't be successful without the support of our partners and developers who are visionary and can see a use case that does not exist, and they take a decision or make a decision to use our SDK to build this new experience that has never existed before. So I'll just say that I'm very grateful that people are here today, and can't wait to see what they get to build with our technology.
Great. Thank you very much, Rana, for being here and being part of Emotion AI Developer Day.